In times of war and in times of peace, whether seen or unseen, our armed forces support and strengthen our nation. You're a source of inspiration, reassurance, and pride.
When royal guards forced their way into Camilla's private bedroom, they expected silence, maybe scandal, but not this. Behind those locked doors lay something so startling, so utterly unimaginable, that even the guards themselves were shaken. Whispers spread through the palace like wildfire, leaving the royal family scrambling to contain the shock. What they found wasn't just unexpected. It was absolutely shocking.
Until from her pen sprang one of the best-loved characters in literature, and certainly everybody's favourite nanny. None other than Mary Poppins, who was and is practically perfect in every way.
The royal family has long been a subject of public intrigue, yet much of their personal lives are kept tightly under wraps. Buckingham Palace, as one of the most famous and iconic royal residences, represents an air of mystery that is almost as famous as the family itself. Inside its walls, royal members are expected to maintain a level of decorum that leaves little room for personal expression in the public eye. But what happens behind closed doors is a different story. For years, rumors have circulated about the private lives of the royals, with whispers about hidden rooms, private sanctuaries, and the things that are deliberately kept out of sight. While these rumors may seem like nothing more than gossip, they have a way of persisting in the minds of the public and even among palace staff. The guards who serve at the royal palaces are bound by duty and tradition. Their roles are critical to maintaining the security of the royal family, and they undergo extensive training to handle their responsibilities with the utmost discretion. These guards are not merely soldiers. They are caretakers of the monarchy's most precious assets, sworn to protect the family and everything they hold dear. For them, their daily routines involve more than standing guard at grand entrances or escorting the Queen to official functions. They are tasked with ensuring the safety and privacy of one of the world's most high-profile families. But what happens when the line between duty and curiosity becomes blurred? Camilla, as the Queen Consort, has always been a figure of both admiration and scrutiny. As the wife of King Charles III, she represents an important part of the monarchy's present and future. However, her personal life, like that of any royal, is not completely exempt from the intense scrutiny that follows anyone who takes a place in the public eye. The public knows little about her private life, as the royal family maintains strict control over what is revealed to the outside world. Her bedroom, much like other royal spaces, is expected to be a place of rest and solitude, far removed from the public gaze. But what if the sanctuary was hiding more than just personal belongings? What if it concealed something far more significant, something that could change the way the public perceives Camilla, and, by extension, the monarchy itself? For the guards stationed at the palace, the idea of a secret hidden space was not entirely new. Over the years, they had become familiar with the various private rooms and restricted areas within the palace, places that were not part of public tours or official documentation. The royal family, like any prominent household, requires areas where their private affairs can be kept from prying eyes. These spaces are, by design, meant to be inaccessible to anyone without the proper clearance. In fact, the very nature of these rooms adds to their allure, creating an almost mythical quality that captivates those who work within the palace. However, the rumors surrounding Camilla's bedroom were different. Staff members and guards alike had begun to notice unusual activity around the room, things that didn't add up. It wasn't just that the room was off limits. It was the secrecy surrounding it that drew attention. There were whispers among palace staff about strange deliveries and unusual movements in and out of the room, with some suggesting that things were being hidden away from public view. These rumors, though never confirmed, were enough to pique the curiosity of those tasked with safeguarding the palace. As the rumors swirled, guards who worked long, silent shifts at night began to wonder whether there was any truth to the stories they had been hearing. It's one thing to hear gossip about hidden rooms and forbidden spaces, But it's another thing entirely when those rumors begin to take root in your own mind. For the guards, the pressure of secrecy became almost unbearable. They had been trained to ignore the temptation to ask questions, to never pry into matters that were not their concern. But with each passing day, the nagging question of what lay behind the closed door of Camilla's bedroom became harder to dismiss. The guards were bound by tradition, duty, and loyalty to the monarchy, but even the most disciplined soldiers are only human. When something unknown lingers just out of reach, it becomes a puzzle that demands to be solved. They couldn't help but wonder, what was Camilla hiding in that room? Was it merely personal belongings, as one would expect, or was there something more? The room had been off limits for so long, its contents never seen by anyone outside a very select few, that its very existence began to take on a certain mystique. This is where the story takes a turn. It was not unusual for royal residences to have restricted areas, but the more the guards looked into the rumors surrounding Camilla's bedroom, the more they began to question the reasons for its secrecy. It wasn't just the idea of privacy. It was the way the room seemed to be cloaked in an additional layer of mystery. The guards' growing curiosity began to take shape in their minds, and they knew that their next move would determine the course of events to follow. The breaking point came when a few guards, who had been quietly observing the room and the movements around it, realized that something was amiss. Late one night, while walking the halls of the palace, they noticed that the usual silence of the palace had been disturbed. There were faint sounds coming from Camilla's bedroom, noises that were not typical for the early hours of the morning. Some guards swore they had heard soft footsteps. Others reported seeing shadows moving behind the drawn curtains. What had once been idle gossip was now turning into something more concrete, a mystery that was begging to be unraveled. It wasn't just the rumors of odd sounds that pushed the guards to action. They began to notice more tangible signs that something was wrong. Unusual deliveries were made to Camilla's bedroom, often late at night when no one was supposed to be around. The crates were small, unmarked, and handled with care, almost as though they contained something too valuable to risk damage. The guards watched these events unfold from a distance, trying to make sense of the seemingly innocent activity. But as their suspicion grew, it became clear to them that the contents of Camilla's bedroom were more than just personal effects. The breaking point came when one particular guard, growing more uneasy with each passing day, decided to take matters into his own hands. He had been stationed near the queen consort's bedroom for several nights, and the temptation to uncover the truth became too great to ignore. This was no longer about idle curiosity. This was about something deeper, something that could potentially shift the foundation of the monarchy itself. The break-in of Camilla's bedroom was the catalyst for a series of events that would expose secrets and challenge long-held traditions. But what the guards found inside that room would shock everyone. What was once a carefully guarded mystery was now out in the open, and the monarchy would never be the same again. For centuries, the British royal family has cultivated an image of unwavering dignity and poise. The palaces they inhabit, with their grand architecture, sweeping halls, and richly decorated rooms, are open to the public only in select, carefully curated portions. Behind closed doors, however, lies a world of privacy, where personal lives are kept as guarded as the royal jewels. This world is inaccessible to most, even those who serve within the walls of the palaces. For palace staff and royal guards, their lives are defined by the need for discretion, loyalty, and silence. It is a world where curiosity can easily be stifled by the weight of tradition, where the consequences of breaking rank can be severe. However, the reality behind these closed doors is not always as serene as the image that is projected to the world. In fact, it is often far more complex and, at times, unsettling. For the guards assigned to the royal residences, this reality was something they were constantly reminded of in their training. From the moment they donned the uniform, these guards were drilled in the importance of their role. Their duty was clear: protect the monarchy, ensure its safety, and never let the public see anything that could tarnish the family's image. It wasn't just a matter of guarding entrances or patrolling the grounds. It was about keeping secrets, upholding centuries-old protocols, and preserving the mystique that surrounded the monarchy. This sense of duty, however, did not always account for the very human instinct of curiosity. It was an instinct that would become harder to ignore as the guards began to hear whispers about a particular room, the queen consort's bedroom. To them, the bedroom was not just a private space. It became a symbol of the things that might lie beyond the surface of royal life. While royal households are filled with spaces meant for public engagement, such as lavish drawing rooms and stately banquet halls, there are other places within the palaces that are carefully kept from the public's eye. These places, often hidden behind locked doors and discreet hallways, are where the royal family can retreat from the spotlight. They are meant to serve as private sanctuaries, places where the royals can rest, think, and be themselves without the pressure of public expectation. Yet even these sanctuaries come with their own restrictions. These rooms, while private, are still part of a larger, highly regulated system designed to maintain the family's image and control access to the most personal aspects of their lives. The queen consort, Camilla, was no stranger to the constant balancing act between public life and personal privacy. As the wife of King Charles III, she was expected to adhere to the royal family's long-standing traditions, while also carving out her own identity within the monarchy. Her role as queen consort brought her both admiration and scrutiny, with every aspect of her life under a magnifying glass. However, like all royals, Camilla's personal space, her bedroom, was meant to be off-limits to the public eye. For those tasked with keeping the palace safe, this space was not just another part of the royal residence. It was a symbol of the family's privacy, and it was guarded as such. Little did anyone know, the secrecy surrounding this room would eventually become the focus of a mystery that would shake the foundations of the monarchy. The story of the bedroom's secrets did not begin with a grand entrance or a dramatic revelation. Instead, it started with small, seemingly insignificant whispers among staff and guards. These whispers, though faint at first, began to grow louder as rumors spread throughout the palace. It was common knowledge that royal families, like any other prominent households, kept certain areas of their residences strictly off-limits. But the whispers about Camilla's bedroom hinted at something more than just a private space. There were murmurs of unusual deliveries, of crates being brought into the room under tight security, of strange sounds late at night, footsteps, voices, and the faint smell of burning paper. These were not the sort of things that could easily be dismissed, especially when they came from multiple sources. For the guards stationed at the royal residences, the sense of duty that defined their lives now collided with the stirring of curiosity. What was hidden behind those locked doors? As the weeks passed, the rumors surrounding Camilla's bedroom became more persistent. Some of the palace staff claimed to have seen shadows moving behind the curtains. Others spoke of hearing voices inside the room when no one was supposed to be there. The strangest part of all was the sense of secrecy that surrounded these events. It wasn't just that the room was private, it was the secrecy that enveloped it. There were many parts of the palace that were private, but this room in particular seemed to carry an added layer of mystery. It was as if the very act of keeping it hidden was an essential part of its purpose. For the guards, this secrecy became a point of intrigue. One of the key aspects of being a royal guard is the importance of maintaining discretion. They are trained to ignore the temptation to pry into matters that are none of their concern. To do so would not only risk their position, but could also damage the royal family's carefully curated public image. Royal staff, including guards, are bound by this code of silence. To question the actions of a royal family member, even privately, could lead to severe consequences. Guards are taught to respect the boundaries set by tradition, even if those boundaries are difficult to understand or uncomfortable to uphold. Yet, in this particular case, the boundaries were beginning to seem more like barriers to the truth. and the guards found themselves torn between their duty to protect the monarchy and their growing need to understand what was happening behind closed doors. The guards, who had spent countless hours on patrol, began to notice patterns, late-night deliveries, movements around Camilla's bedroom that seemed out of the ordinary, and the ever-present sense that something was being kept from them. It was not that they expected to find a grand conspiracy or a scandalous secret, but the unanswered questions began to gnaw at them. Why had no one spoken openly about the room? What was being kept hidden? And why? The room, which had once been simply another private space in the royal residence, now felt like the focal point of something much larger, a mystery that could not be ignored. As their curiosity grew, so did their unease. It was no longer enough to simply suspect that something was amiss. The guards began to share their observations with one another. They spoke in hushed tones, careful not to let their conversations carry. The more they shared, the more they realized that they were not alone in their suspicions. Other guards had noticed the same things: the odd deliveries, the strange sounds, and the pervasive feeling that something was off. As each new detail was uncovered, the mystery surrounding Camilla's bedroom deepened. It was during one of his late-night patrols that he first noticed something unusual. The door to Camilla's bedroom, which had always been locked and secure, appeared different. There were faint marks around the edges, as if the lock had been tampered with. The guard's training told him not to jump to conclusions, but the sight of the marks was enough to send a chill down his spine. It was as if the very door to Camilla's personal space had been disturbed, and the implications of that disturbance were enough to send his mind racing. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the rumors were not just idle gossip. Something was happening behind those closed doors, something that no one was willing to talk about. And the longer he remained silent, the harder it became to ignore the truth. The guard knew that he was crossing a line, and the consequences of his actions could be severe. But as his curiosity grew, so did his sense of urgency. He could no longer stand idly by and watch as the mystery deepened. Something had to be done, and that, ultimately, would lead to the fateful decision that would change everything. As the days passed and the whispers surrounding Camilla's bedroom continued to grow, the tension within the palace began to simmer beneath the surface. For the guards, the mystery surrounding the room became something much more than idle gossip. It transformed into an obsession, a challenge that demanded answers. Their sense of duty, which had always guided them through the most difficult moments, now conflicted with their growing curiosity. The line between what they were trained to do, guard the monarchy, and what they were increasingly tempted to discover, became blurred. As the guards' suspicions grew, the unease among the palace staff and the guards alike reached a tipping point. What had begun as faint rumors now began to manifest into something tangible, something that demanded action. The mystery of Camilla's bedroom wasn't just about a locked door or secret deliveries anymore. It was about secrecy itself, about the very idea that something could be hidden from the public, from the very people who served in the palace. The guards were no longer just passive observers to the events unfolding around them. They had become active participants in a story that was beginning to feel far larger than they had anticipated. The turning point came one evening when a guard, on his usual patrol, noticed something that would change the course of the investigation. This particular guard had been stationed near the area for several weeks and had become familiar with the layout of the palace. The rhythmic sounds of footsteps echoing through the marble corridors, the quiet hum of the heating systems, and the occasional rustle of fabric were all part of his nightly routine. But tonight, something felt different. There was an unusual stillness in the air, a quiet that seemed to hang over the palace like a thick fog. The guard had passed the familiar hallways countless times before, but tonight, as he walked near the section of the palace that housed Camilla's bedroom, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The carpet, which had always been perfectly in place, now appeared to have been disturbed. It was as though something heavy had recently been dragged across it, leaving faint indentations in the plush fabric. At first, it seemed like nothing more than an odd coincidence, but as the guard examined the marks more closely, he realized they led to a section of the wall where no doorway was marked. This, of course, was highly unusual. The palace had been constructed with precision, and every wall, corridor, and doorway had a purpose. No hidden passageways or secret doors had been officially recorded, and yet this indentation seemed to suggest something entirely different. He knelt down to inspect the wall, brushing his fingers across the surface. As his hand traced the wood, he felt a narrow groove running vertically from the floor to the ceiling. The sensation of a seam in the wall was unmistakable. It was as if the wall itself was hiding something deliberately concealed. His heart began to race as he realized that what he was touching was not simply a decorative feature. It was a door, one that had been concealed for years, perhaps decades. After a brief pause, the guard made a decision. He would not enter the hidden room just yet, but he would return the following night with another guard to investigate further. It was a decision that would set the stage for what was to come. His mind raced with possibilities, each more thrilling than the last. Could there be something inside that room? Something that could change the course of history? The idea of finding a long-lost treasure, forbidden letters, or scandalous documents was exciting. But it was the mystery itself that had captured his attention. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the mystery was not just about the physical space. It was about what the room represented. It was about the things that the monarchy, for reasons unknown, had chosen to keep hidden from the world. The next evening, the guard returned to the area, carefully concealing his presence as he made his way down the hall toward the hidden door. He was joined by a fellow guard, who had also become intrigued by the rumors surrounding Camilla's bedroom. Together, they carefully examined the seam in the wall, testing the panel for any signs of movement. At first, it seemed impossible to open. The panel was expertly crafted, with no obvious latch or handle. But as they gently pressed against the wall, a faint click echoed through the silence. The door shifted ever so slightly, revealing a narrow gap just wide enough for them to slip through. The guards exchanged a brief, silent glance. Their hearts pounded in their chests, but neither of them said a word. They had crossed the threshold now. There was no turning back. What they discovered beyond that door would forever change their perception of the royal family and their understanding of the monarchy's hidden world. The room beyond the door was not what they had expected. The moment they stepped inside, the air felt warmer, almost as if the room had been sealed off from the rest of the palace for a long time. The space was dimly lit, with only the flickering light from their lantern casting shadows across the walls. The room, though small, was carefully arranged, with an air of order and purpose. It felt almost like a study, but there was something unsettling about it, a feeling of intimacy that seemed out of place within the grand walls of the palace. As the guards looked around, they saw a number of objects that immediately piqued their interest. On a table covered with a fine cloth sat several leather-bound journals, stacked neatly in rows. The journals, though worn with age, appeared to be in good condition, as if someone had taken great care in preserving them. The guards, careful not to disturb anything, exchanged a glance. It was clear that the room had been kept in a state of preservation, not neglect. The contents of the journals, they suspected, could hold answers to the questions that had been tormenting them for weeks. At the far side of the room, they noticed a cabinet, its polished wood gleaming in the dim light. The cabinet was locked, but its surface revealed faint scratches, as though it had been opened recently. The guard's curiosity was piqued further. What was inside this cabinet? What secrets could it hold? But it was not just the objects in the room that caught their attention. On the wall hung a portrait, covered by a heavy cloth. One of the guards approached it, pulling the fabric aside to reveal the image beneath. The portrait was of a young woman who, though not Camilla herself, bore a striking resemblance to her. The likeness was uncanny, and beneath the portrait was an inscription, faint but legible, bearing a date from long before Camilla had ascended to her royal position. The guard stared at the portrait, his mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? And why was her image kept hidden away in the secret room? The resemblance to Camilla was undeniable, but the date beneath the portrait suggested that she had lived long before Camilla's time. The mystery deepened. The guards continued to explore the room, moving cautiously through the space. The room was filled with personal items, letters tied with ribbons, some yellowed with age, jewelry, delicate and unfamiliar to the royal catalog, and other items that seemed to tell a story of a life lived far from the public eye. As they looked around, the guards began to realize that they were not simply in a forgotten space. This was a room that had been carefully curated, a place where someone had spent time preserving the past. It was a room that held not just objects, but memories, intimate memories that had been hidden away from the world. For a moment, neither guard spoke. The weight of what they had discovered pressed down upon them. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The room, once a mystery, had now revealed its secrets. The question remained, what would they do with this knowledge? They had stumbled upon something far more significant than a hidden room. They had uncovered a private history, a history that could shatter the carefully constructed image of the monarchy. The first sign of the palace's reaction came quietly but decisively. The guards, who had stumbled upon the hidden room, were summoned to a private meeting with their superiors. It was not an interrogation, at least not officially, but the tension in the air was palpable. Their every word, their every glance, was scrutinized with an intensity that spoke volumes. There was no need to ask directly whether they had opened the door to the hidden room. The signs of entry were too clear. The scratches on the wall, the subtle shifts in the paneling, the faint evidence of their intrusion. But the palace needed more than just confirmation. It needed control over the situation. It needed to ensure that the secret of the hidden room would remain just that, a secret. The guards were questioned in a way that suggested the palace had known more than it let on. There was a sense that the monarchy had anticipated the possibility of someone uncovering the hidden chamber. They had been waiting for the breach, as though the discovery of the room was something that could not be entirely prevented. The palace's response was swift, almost mechanical, but it lacked the panic one might expect from an institution that had just had its deepest secret exposed. Instead, the monarchy seemed to operate on the assumption that it could contain the fallout, that it could control the narrative, and prevent the public from learning the full extent of what had been uncovered. The guards, though shaken by their discovery, had no choice but to comply with the palace's directives. They were warned in no uncertain terms that the secrecy surrounding the room was paramount. They were instructed to remain silent, to tell no one what they had seen, and to report any further developments directly to their superiors. Their loyalty to the crown was not in question, but the palace needed to ensure that its carefully curated image remained intact. A single leak, a single whisper to the wrong person, could unravel everything. The monarchy thrived on its image of perfection, and a scandal of this magnitude, one involving hidden rooms and long-forgotten secrets, could not be allowed to see the light of day. Despite these stern warnings, the discovery of the hidden room had set a series of events in motion that could not be easily contained. For the guards, the knowledge of what they had uncovered weighed heavily on their minds. They had broken protocol, but in doing so, they had exposed something far more significant than they had anticipated. The objects they had seen, intimate letters, personal journals, portraits, and trinkets, were not merely relics of a bygone era. They were pieces of a history that the monarchy had worked tirelessly to keep hidden from the public. The more the guards reflected on what they had found, the more they began to realize that this was not just about the queen consort's private life. It was about the monarchy's ability to control its own narrative, to hide the parts of its history that were deemed unfit for public consumption. The weight of their actions began to take its toll. The younger guard, in particular, found himself unable to shake the image of the portrait he had uncovered. The woman who resembled Camilla so closely, but who had lived long before her time in the palace. Who was she, and why had her image been hidden away in such a manner? The more he thought about it, the more questions arose. The journals, too, haunted him. What secrets did they hold? What could be written inside those pages that would justify keeping them locked away for so long? He knew that the answers were within reach, but he was bound by a loyalty that seemed to be growing weaker with each passing day. The older guard, though more cautious, shared many of the same concerns. He, too, had been unsettled by the discovery, but his years of service had taught him the importance of discretion. He knew that the palace would not tolerate any breach of protocol, and that the consequences for revealing what they had found would be severe. Yet, even as he reminded his younger companion of the importance of loyalty, he, too, found himself questioning the monarchy's motives. Was it really necessary to keep these secrets hidden from the public? What harm could there be in allowing the people to know the full story, to see the human side of the royal family? As the days went by, the tension continued to mount. The guards returned to their regular duties, but their minds were no longer focused on the routine tasks of palace security. They had seen too much, and now they carried the burden of that knowledge with them wherever they went. Every glance, every conversation seemed to carry new weight. They could not escape the reality of what they had discovered. And the more they thought about it, the more they began to question their own role in protecting the monarchy's image. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the palace began to tighten its grip on the situation. The door to the hidden room was reinforced, and additional security measures were put in place to ensure that no one else would uncover the secret. The staff who had been aware of the room's existence were reassigned, their conversations cut short. The palace worked quickly to erase any trace of the breach, but the damage had already been done. The secret of the hidden room was no longer just a rumor. It was a reality, and it could not be erased. The monarchy's response was not just about containing the leak. It was about control, about ensuring that the narrative surrounding the royal family remained intact, no matter the cost. In the days that followed, palace officials began to question the guards more closely. Their every move was monitored, and their actions were scrutinized in ways that they had never experienced before. The palace was not just concerned about the breach of protocol. It was concerned about the potential fallout from the public. The monarchy was built on the idea of tradition, stability, and secrecy, and this revelation threatened to shake the very foundations of that carefully constructed image. The guards, though they had been warned and monitored, began to feel the weight of their choices more acutely. They had entered the hidden room once, and now they could not forget what they had seen. It was as though the room itself had become a living, breathing entity, one that refused to be ignored, but there was no going back. The discovery of the room had set into motion a chain of events that could not be undone. The palace might have attempted to cover up the breach, but the truth had already begun to seep through the cracks. For the monarchy, the revelation of the hidden room was not just a matter of preserving its image, it was a matter of survival. The very foundation of the royal family's legitimacy rested on its ability to control the narrative, to keep its secrets hidden from the public eye. The discovery of Camilla's secret room had shaken that control to its core. The guards, though they had been sworn to silence, could not unsee what they had found. And as they struggled with their own consciences, they realized that the monarchy's grip on its own history was slipping, one secret at a time. For the guards, the aftermath of their discovery was a quiet torment. The walls of the palace, once filled with the echoes of routine, now felt heavy with the weight of the knowledge they carried. They had seen a side of the royal family that few ever had the chance to witness, and it was not something they could easily forget. Each passing day reminded them of the burden they now bore. They were bound by their oaths to protect the monarchy, but they were also human. The moral weight of their actions pressed upon them as they continued with their duties, unable to escape the reality of what they had uncovered. Their silence became more profound as the days wore on. They had been warned to keep what they had seen to themselves, and the consequences of speaking out were too great to ignore. The monarchy's grip on the situation had been firm, but the cracks in the facade remained. The palace was no longer just a place of opulence and order. It had become a repository of secrets, each one more fragile than the last. The hidden room was not just a physical space. It was a symbol of the monarchy's vulnerability, a reminder that even the most carefully crafted images could be shattered by the smallest of breaches. Though the palace tried to restore normalcy, there was a sense that something had irrevocably changed. The guards, once devoted to their duties, now found themselves questioning the institution they had sworn to protect. They had seen what lay behind the polished doors of the palace, and they could no longer ignore the complexity of the monarchy's hidden world. The rooms of Buckingham Palace, once filled with the hum of daily life, now seemed to hold a quiet tension. The whispers of the hidden room echoed through the halls, a reminder of the secrets that could never be fully contained. The monarchy, in its usual way, tried to regain control over the narrative. The discovery had shaken the very foundation of the royal family's carefully constructed image, and the palace worked tirelessly to reinforce its authority. The events surrounding the hidden room were downplayed, kept out of the public eye. Yet, the more the palace sought to suppress the story, the more it became clear that the secret could never truly be erased. It had already taken root in the minds of those who had seen it, and in the minds of those who had heard the whispers. The monarchy, for all its power and influence, could not fully control the legacy of the hidden room. In the weeks that followed, the royal family carried on with their public duties, maintaining an air of composure and grace. Yet, behind the polished smiles and carefully scripted speeches, there was an unspoken tension. The hidden room, once a secret, was now a part of the royal family's history, an unspoken chapter that could never be fully erased. For the guards, their role in uncovering the room had changed them. They were no longer simply protectors of the monarchy. They had become custodians of a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. The final impact of the discovery was a subtle shift in the way the palace operated. The royal family, once known for its unwavering control, was now forced to reckon with the reality of its own fragility. The hidden room had not only exposed a private world within the palace walls, it had also revealed the monarchy's deep reliance on secrecy and image. The monarchy's greatest strength, its ability to project power and stability, had been threatened by the smallest of breaches. The royal family had long relied on its ability to conceal its vulnerabilities, but the discovery of the hidden room had shattered that illusion. For the guards, the decision to remain silent had been the only option. To speak out would have meant the end of their careers and possibly their freedom. The palace had made it clear that the secret of the hidden room was not to be shared with the world. But as time went on, the legacy of the room continued to haunt them. They had entered a forbidden space, and in doing so, had uncovered a story meant to remain untold. Whether they spoke of it or not, the room would remain a part of their lives, a secret that could never be erased from their memory.